Good morning, everybody. Today will be probably a short demonstration, but what I wanted to do is to take lesson 5, which covers basic transformations or transforming artwork in Adobe Illustrator, and clarify a couple of things that I think kind of got goofed up or maybe weren't clear from my lecture yesterday. There's a couple of things that I like doing a little bit differently than the book. And you can choose to adopt my techniques or not. It's totally up to you. But let's start first with rulers and guidelines. So you can see they asked us in the lesson to put a guideline here, 400 pixels. Now, how do I know it's 400 pixels? Because if I go ahead and I turn on rulers, and you can either do that with Command R, whoops, there we go, Command R, that brings up rulers, and you can see that we are in inches. If I toggle again, Command R, that turns it off. Or what they've done in recent iterations of Adobe Illustrator is they have in the properties panel, they have a little button right up here that when you have the document itself selected, I can click here to turn rulers on or off. I can also have another button for a grid if I want. I also have a button for transparency. Talked about that. Now, I rarely ever use the one for transparency. Once in a blue moon, I will use a grid, but I use rulers all the time. Now, where we started off is that we're working in pixels. So again, using the properties panel, I can change from inches to pixels here. And you can change back and forth on the fly. One of the things that should note is that typically when you're designing web pages, you design in pixels, and when you're designing for print, you design in inches. So again, you can toggle back and forth if you know that a document will be used for both purposes. That works pretty nicely. We also have buttons down here. It says if I want to hide guides, I can do that from here. I can click that button, I can bring it back. I also have another one here that if I want to lock guides, which is a nice feature, I can do that as well. And then the other one here, the third button, is to hide smart guides. Now, I like smart guides up a lot. And right now they're hidden and we can turn them back on. And as I start to roll over things and move them around, you'll see that the little pink lines start to pop up. Okay, so about guides and about rulers. The way that I prefer to do it, rather than just arbitrarily put a guide in here or there, is that I like to assign a specific layer for my guides, and that's usually at the top. So if you look at what I've done here under layers, is that I've added a layer and I've assigned it to the guides. And here I have one here. So that I typically have all of my guides here. I can lock them from here as well and keep them as a group. I can also turn them off from here. But I like, right now we're just using one guide, so it's kind of a non-issue. But I like this as a feature too, that if I have 5, 10 guides, I like them to be kind of packaged together. So I will put that in a guide layer. And, I can always turn it off. I can always lock it. And when I select it, because it is on a separate layer, let's go ahead and turn it on. Let's go ahead and select the guide and click on it. Sometimes it's not that easy to select. Come on. Did I lock it? I did. I locked it from over here. So let's turn that off. So notice it highlights in red, and red happens to be the color of this new layer that I've assigned for guides. So for the time being, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and lock it. Okay, so I'll lock guides and I'll turn them off so I don't see them for the time being. So that's one thing that I wanted to cover. The other thing regarding rulers is that I mentioned that when you click on a particular artboard, that if you look at the top and the left, look at the rulers, you'll see that we have at the bottom, I have 0, and over to the left, I have 0 right here to the left. Now, if I double click in the upper left-hand corner, it's a little crosshair here. It's very difficult to see. It's going to be very difficult to see on my recording. But if I double click, you'll notice that it resets it by default. I moved it the other day when I was thinking about what I was going to talk about today. So by default, the vertical ruler, the 0 is right here in the upper left-hand corner. Okay. And likewise, starting from the left of the artboard, I have 0 here. Now, how does that translate to inches? Again, I can always switch. I can go to inches, and you can see that we have from 0 to, this is 16 inches, okay? So if you want add a guideline, or you want to move a particular object to a particular location, you can do that. Now, to do that, one of the things that you might want to think about doing is, for example, I want to move the text. And if I want to move the top corner of the text 1 inch over and 1.5 inches down, or 2 inches down, I can do so. Now, once it's selected, if I look at the properties panel, we can see based on this little widget here, notice that I have the top left corner selected. It tells me that it's a 1/2 inch over from the left, a little over a 1/2 inch. But if I wanted exactly 1/2 inch, then what I could do is I could highlight that, and I can just put 0.5 and hit the tab key, and that moved it over. Now, from the top of my artboard, it's just under 1 inch. But if I want the top left-hand corner to be exactly 1 inch, again, I can highlight that, and we'll go ahead and I'll put 1 there and hit the tab key, and it will move it down, and it is very precise. So this can be used a lot. So you have 9 little buttons here that determine, if I go ahead and I click the center one, which is usually the one by default, it tells you where the center of that piece of text is. It's exactly 3.2314 inches across and 1.8475 inches down. And it gives you a very precise size of that. Okay. So depending on how you want to move this and how important precision is, this little widget here can be very useful. Okay. Again, if I want to change the 0, orientation of the rulers, I can simply click in that upper left-hand corner where that little crosshair is and drag, and it's a very subtle thing. And I can move it down here to the lower left-hand corner, and notice that it moved the vertical 0 down here to that corner. Now, when I click this particular artboard, you'll see that it went back to 0, 0 in the upper left-hand corner. I didn't change the orientation for that. But if I go back to my first one over here, it's still there. Now, if you want to reset it, just simply double click in the upper left-hand corner and it resets it. So I don't know how well you can see, but that works nicely. As I said, I like having rulers up all the time. Not so much that everything that I do is very precise, but it gives me, ballpark numbers. So it gives me general sense of what I'm doing here. The other thing that I was having difficulty with yesterday is that when we select the artboards, okay? And I wanted to go ahead and I wanted to rearrange all of these, okay? So right now I have spacing, and I'm going to go ahead and I want it to be horizontal, all of it horizontal, and I want the order to be moved to the right. And let's say I want all of them to be maybe 1 inch apart. So if I put in the 1 inch and I hit the tab, and I want to move artwork or the artboard, and I click OK. Okay. Notice that it moved the artboard, but it didn't move the artwork. And yesterday when I was lecturing, I couldn't figure out for the life of me what I was doing wrong. And I wasn't doing anything wrong. What the problem was after after the lecture was over, is that, let me go back out of here and let's undo that. Let me show you where the problem lies. So when I looked at layers, you can see that every single object in this, in these 3 illustrations is unlocked, except for the background of the first artboard down here at the bottom. The background shape, that was locked. So I thought even with it locked, it should move everything, but it didn't. So now when I unlock it, and I go ahead and I close that, and let's try that again. Let's go ahead and I want to click on the background here, and I'm going to select the artboard tool. Now I'm going to select rearrange all, and I'll select, I'll just select a 1/2 inch this time, 0.5 inches to reduce it. So I want to make sure that I move artwork with the artboard. You don't have to, but if I click OK now, notice that everything moved, that it tightened up between them, and that was the problem. There was the background image, that green layer here, this one right here, I'll move that out, was locked, and that didn't move when I rearranged them. That I found very, very surprising. And as I also mentioned a couple of times when I was having trouble with this, is that for me, it's not that, because I generally work for myself, it's not that critical that everything be perfectly aligned, all the artboards be aligned and perfectly distributed and that sort of thing. But as I also mentioned, that if you're working with a team, or you want to hand it over to another designer or some other professional who's going to print it, you might want to present a more professional appearance, and then to tidy up your artwork isn't a bad idea. So anyway, that was the problem there. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that I like deconstructing the artwork of others, and just to see how they, put together things. Because sometimes when I'm doing the lessons, I don't pay particular attention to how they organize their artwork. But afterwards, especially when I'm having troubles, I like to go back in and deconstruct what they've done to see if, if I would do it in a similar fashion or in a different way. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to take this first artboard here. And with it selected, I'm going to go ahead and go to view. And I want to go ahead and fit artboard in window. And it just enlarges the whole thing. Okay. So this is what I want to work with, and I'm going to duplicate. A couple of things that I want to look at is I want to look at this grouped, grouped objects and these groups of objects down here, and see if I would do them a little bit differently. And it turns out that I would. I don't know why they put them together the way they did, but it really doesn't matter. So that's, everybody who works on these illustrations is going to put them together a little bit differently depending on your work habits. So let me go ahead and then zoom out a little bit. And I'm going to deselect the artwork. And I'm going to copy this artboard. So what I'll do is I'll go to the artboard tool. With this artboard selected, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select a new artboard. So to do that, if I click the little plus sign, notice that it added that. Now I can go ahead and just move this down over. Okay, I'm going to put it down below. Okay. Now I'm going to make a copy of a couple of things just to see how they organize things. See if I would do it the same way or a little bit differently. The first one was the little cityscape back here. So I'm going to go ahead and select it and drag it, hold down the Shift key and the Option key, and that allows me to drag it down perfectly vertically and to make a copy of it at the same time. Okay, so let's drag that down a little bit more. Hold down the Shift key so it locks it in. And as you can see, all of these separate elements are part of a group. To know that they're a group, you can go ahead and when I bring up layers and it is selected, you'll see that as I scroll down, because they have everything right now on one single layer, we can see that this is the group right here. And then within that group, there are two groups. So again, this is just an aside, something that may or may not pique your interest. But what I like to do is then I'm going to go ahead and look inside that group to see how this is constructed. So if I double click, okay, now I can see in the upper left-hand corner now I am inside that group. And now when I select one of these, again, you can see that it's broken down into two more groups. So those are the groups that are inside there. And then if I double click inside each of these, we can see how these are constructed. And you can see that I have a group in here of the little windows that they put together. All right, and here's another, probably a copy of the group or a smaller size of the group. And how they configured these in their array, I'm not sure. Maybe they did it individually for each one. One of the things that maybe I would like to do so that I would only have to make one of these would be to go ahead and use the draw inside feature and put a group inside. And then I could take the one for the tallest building and scroll down so that you only see part of it for the other buildings. But again, that's how they've constructed this, okay, into two separate groups. Why it's not one group, I don't know. Again, that's just, I found that curious to know how they did that. So I'm going to go outside of the group. I'm going to undo everything. And let's go back out. Outside of that. And there we go. So I'm outside of that group. The other thing that I was curious about, and I know that they wanted to incorporate a separate element, a separate little flower shape inside here. And I put it inside the group. But again, doing the same thing, I would want to know how they constructed this. And it would be, I would do it a little bit differently. Typically, when you're working on illustrations like this, you sort of plan ahead a little. It isn't done too much on the fly. But since we see the pattern of the flowers mirrored, okay, so it's the same pattern, but just mirrored from one side to the other, I would take each of these and work with them as a group. So likewise, I'm going to go ahead and make a copy of this and pull it down just to see how this works, you know, how they put theirs together. And I'm going to double click, go inside. Now I'm inside that group, and you can see that I have a group here. And if I click over here, I have a group there that has the percentage, it has the text, and it has the flowers. If I take this and I double click again, now you can see that each of these flowers are separate entities. Okay, now I would have probably put these together as a group. That's just me. So by doing that, or I mean, I could select them all, but just to make sure that what I have on the right side mirrors what I have on the left, I would go ahead and I would select them all. Make sure they're all selected. Okay, and then I would group them together, Command G. Okay. So now I have that as a group within a group itself, within a couple of groups. And then when I was ready, I would go ahead and I would make a copy of this and mirror it to the other side. But then it would just keep all of these intact. And I wouldn't have to maybe add a little floral pattern later on. So that's pretty much it. That's what I wanted to cover today. Little things like that, ways of deconstructing, seeing how other people have put together their illustrations. See if you would do it the same way. I typically try to think of slightly different ways of doing it that are maybe a little bit more streamlined and efficient. But that's not always possible. If you are working with illustrations that are very similar to one another that you do frequently, that's the way to go. So that if you're working as a freelance illustrator or graphic designer, that you generally will get the same amount of money for each illustration that you do. If you're working for the same client and it has the same degree of distribution, whether it's local or all the way up to international. So it's not like you're going to make more money, you know, the longer you work for a company. The only way you will work or you will earn more money is if you can do the same amount of work in less time. And that means working, you know, a little bit smarter, more efficiently. And so by using many of the tools that they provide for us here and use them in a, you know, a smart, intelligent way, then that would be the way to go. Anyway, that will shorten your work time considerably. And later on, when we get the symbols, if you discover that there are elements that you use very frequently and you want to add them to a library of little illustrations, you can do that as well. And that would shorten your work time as well, make you work more efficiently, streamline your workflow considerably. So let me get out of this. There we go. Anyway, let me zoom out of here. Anything else that I would like to talk about here? Yeah, snap options. I haven't talked about that. That can be really important as well, is that what you can do here is we can snap the point. You can snap to a grid if you're using a grid, or we can go ahead here and we can snap to a pixel. So it's up to you. Sometimes that can assist you and sometimes that can make when you move things a little herky-jerky. So it really depends, but it will, like guidelines, it will help you to, again, to align things a little bit more efficiently and a little bit easier without having to measure things so much. So that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about today. You know, not quite a half an hour's worth of stuff. But I hope I've clarified some things from the other day. Maybe one other thing that I could talk about too is that I'm going to take this. Let's take this guy here. And I'm going to move him down over here. And I'm going to make a copy of him. And I'm going to zoom in. And I talked about this a little bit yesterday, but this is a part of a group. Okay. And with it grouped, if you want to make, I wouldn't make significant changes, but if you want to make some minor changes, then that tool that works very nicely, that it's available to us is the Puppet Warp. And when I click on that, okay, if that's selected, I can see the mesh. Now, I like looking at the mesh, but they wanted us to turn it off. And so again, with Puppet Warp selected, okay, over to the right in the properties panel, I can turn that off and I can say hide mesh. That's what that does. But it provides for me these little anchor points, or they're represented by push pins that allow me to click and drag and to move things kind of in a free form manner. But again, you have to be careful because if other elements are not tacked down, see how it's really distorting everything when I move that one point? The only way that you can avoid that is that if I only wanted a portion of this to be moved, then you have to add additional points to the areas around it that you want to leave, or push pins that you want to leave intact. So if I only want to move the scarf and I don't want to move the hair, I don't want to move the backpack or anything else, notice all the little push pins that I added around here to anchor it so that it wouldn't move. So now when I move this, it's only moving the scarf and nothing else. However, if I come back, let's go ahead and select each of these. And if you select them and you hit the delete key, they go away. So it's very easy to move them. So I'm going to go back again. And there we go. Notice what's happening is I move those or remove them, that how the movement of the scarf is affecting all of that. Notice how it begins to distort the backpack and the back and other areas around it. So that's how that works. Okay, so I can go ahead and undo that and bring it back a little bit. Undoing it a little bit more. Let's go back. Command Z. See how far back I can go. Well, I might have to go back a few steps. So anyway, let's go back outside of this layer. And let's zoom out. And I can leave that alone because that's a copy of the other one anyway that I've already changed. And again, for the, if I want to get rid of all of this stuff, you just select it and delete it and you're done. If you need to add additional elements, the other thing that I like doing too is similar to what I've done here, is that I will generally build, when I have a work in progress, I'll add an extra artboard like I have here so that I can put the elements as I make them and set them aside and then incorporate them into the final document. And then when I'm done with building everything, throw it away, throw it all away. Throw away that extra artboard. Won't need it anymore. Okay. So a couple of other things. You'll notice the little crosshairs in the middle. If you like knowing where the middle of your file is, your document, you can do that manually if you wish. That's how I used to do that. But when I click here, we can see that if I come over here, let's go to Artboard options. And you can see show center mark, and that's what that is. If you want to say show crosshairs later on, that will help you. If you want to say show video safe areas, if you're working with video, that would be helpful. Okay. So I like seeing the center of my artwork. And that could also, depending on how you're organizing your files or your images, that could be useful if you wanted to make your rulers right in the absolute, the 0, 0, right in the absolute center of your artwork. So now when I look up here, I have 0 in the middle and 0 to the left here. So if I wanted to measure 3 inches to the right and 3 inches to the left, it would be very easy. Okay, if I wasn't using the align tool and the distribute tool and that sort of thing. So it would be easy to, make sure that if I want elements to be evenly distributed on the right and the left, that would enable me to do that. Okay, so just by putting the center mark here and then reassigning the center of the rulers to the center here. So I have 0, 0 in the middle rather than from the upper left-hand corner, which is what you use normally. And that would be the way to go. All right. And then, as I said, when I'm all done, I can go ahead and let's go back. Go back to the artboard, and I can just delete it, get rid of it, and I'm done. So that's all I wanted to cover today. Just a little bit of extra stuff. Problems that I was having the other day. The free transform tool can be kind of nice. We didn't talk about that much. Maybe I could do that again. So let me undo that. Let me bring that back. So a couple of things that you can do with free transform, which are nice. Again, I'll go ahead and I'm going to take a copy of the bicyclist. And I'm going to drag it down. Make a copy here. Okie doke. Now, with the free transform tool, and that can be found right here. And if I also look over here, we have the puppet warp free transform is also there. And when it's selected, you'll notice that you have variations of it here. Now, when I click over this, the center of it, I can skew. It allows me to skew this. If I hold down the shift key, it will lock it in place. That's what we did to skew and create the drop shadow of the cityscape. So that allows you to do that. You also have something that's called, let me undo that, the free transform. If I click on this one down here, then if I click on an individual corner, notice how it allows me to begin to really distort this. And if that's what you're going for, then, for your illustration, then that can be extremely useful. So it's kind of a faux perspective. And then we also have another perspective tool. And it's a 1-point perspective. And that's what this one is right here. So now if I click on this and I want it to look like he's in 1-point perspective, I can do that. So, this part of the wall or him is receding in space and this one is coming forward. Likewise, if I wanted to lay down space, I can go ahead and I can click like so and see how it tapers. And then I can also bring this, go ahead and go back to just that, and we can flatten that. You can see how it looks like it's flattening in space. And I can go over the corner. Let's go back outside of this. Hold down the shift key and enlarge it. You can see how it looks like it's laying back and kind of quasi 3-point perspective. Actually, you're down below and you're looking up. There is a perspective tool that they have eliminated from the lessons that if we have time, I will talk about a little bit later this semester. For certain things, it can be very useful. We don't use it really that much. But again, it's a very specialized tool and it can work really nicely. And that's found right over here, this one right here. So if I click that, you can see that you can only use one perspective guide per artwork. You can see it defaults up here to a 2-point perspective. So typically you're going to have one artboard and you can work with 1, 2, or 3-point perspective. So we can work with that a little bit later, and there are ways of adjusting it and doing some fun things. It's good for product illustration. It's good for doing the stylized architectural details and that sort of thing. But the reason that I mentioned this now is that the free transform tool was used extensively for creating kind of a full 1-point perspective before they introduced the perspective tool. Now, to get rid of this, you have to go back up to view, and then you have to go to perspective grid, and you have to select hide. Now that shift command, I can't see, whatever it is, that's what I use anyway to get rid of that. So there we have a few things. So I'll get rid of this here. And I'll get rid of the artboard. We're back to our original finished lesson. Okay, so I'm going to stop recording, and that's it for today. I have Tristan, who has some questions, and I will, before we leave for today, I will talk to him. And that's it. I will post this in about an hour, the recording of this, and we're done for today. If any of you have more questions, please let me know. And we can always have a one-on-one Zoom meeting or schedule a separate webinar just for you. Okay. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to say goodbye, and I'm going to stop the recording, pause it.